maps and meta-analysis. This is Folsom.
Facts.
And faces.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Folsom Facts and Faces. We are met this week with Geoff McLennan, an expert on passenger rail. I'll let him introduce himself in a second. And this is a special episode. We're going to talk a little bit about passenger rail along the Highway 80 corridor from the Bay to Nevada. So, Joffrey, if you don't mind, could you introduce yourself and what you'd like to talk about today?
Hi. Hello, everybody. I'm Geoff McLennan. I'm a longtime rider of Capitol Corridor, mainly when I was working for the state. I saw the Capitol Corridor rise from the ashes, if you will, of transportation. It took some hard-fought effort. Robert Kindheim was mainly behind it, as well as Chuck Roebuck. They're two pioneers. We all became riders on the Capitol Corridor, and many of us rode between the foothills as far as Colfax, all the way down to Santa Clara, and then back again. And some of us just rode to Sacramento and back. It's a wonderful way to travel. One of my concerns now is getting people up and down Highway 80 in California and perhaps beyond into Nevada, Western Nevada. And I'd like to see people enjoy the train like I did, and it be done comfortably, economically, and efficiently. And I've been waiting for 12 years, so hopefully we can make this happen.
Awesome, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. I had a quick question, kind of on that. I consider myself partially ignorant in this sense too, but for, any of our audience members that might be listening in, what kind of rail infrastructure already exists on that corridor today?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit aged. It's mainly for freight trains, even though the Capitol Corridor uses it. And there is a project just getting underway, I understand. It's called the Third Rail, and it has some other names it's referred to, and it's supposed to be adding additional rail between Sacramento and Roseville, and that is largely for passenger use, but it'll also serve to allow the freight trains to safely enter and exit the line that the trains use going northward along that rail.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. So when we're talking about passenger rail, and I have some limited experience in the train manufacturing industry, at Siemens Mobility in the Sacramento area. Typically there's, light and heavy rail. Now that rail infrastructure you're talking about, is that heavy rail or would that be considered light rail?
The section being, I'm not sure. When I think of the project I have in mind, I'm talking from the Bay Area all the way at least into to Truckee and possibly beyond into Nevada. So I don't have any maps in front of me.
Yeah.
Right now, it would be heavy rail. I've seen the double cars, and UP did make some improvements to some of the tunnels and tracks. UP also destroyed some, what do you call, side tracks where trains could enter and exit. So already we've lost resources and tracks by the decision of UP, which, as we know, owns the tracks since Abraham Lincoln.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious, what kind of frequency and service would you want along that corridor? And would you, I guess, maybe split how the corridor is serviced east of Sacramento versus west of Sacramento? Because it seemed like pre-COVID, a lot of people were using the Capitol Corridor primarily as like a commuter rail service, from like Sacramento to the Bay Area and like the various stops there. So do you kind of envision, the kind of eastern half being run or operated differently than the western half? Just curious to get your thoughts.
That would be a good point. That could be something worked in, but I'll answer your question going backward and forward. Historically, there was something called a snow train. It was privately operated, by a couple out of the Bay Area. And the snow train ran, I believe, from Oakland up to Reno and then back again. It was privately run. It was personed by Amtrak engineers and crew on board. So that was running on the existing tracks. And that ran for about 5 or 6 years and was very successful until COVID hit and we couldn't crowd in together the way we used to in public places, including trains. Going forward, I think both states, that is Nevada and California, rail plans include this train in concept. It hasn't been ironed out. The money hasn't all been budgeted yet. I believe we have somewhere in the vicinity of $10 million or more. Now that was given to by the the Federal Rail Administration, and it was to be divided up, I believe, by the Western states. I don't have those charts in front of me. So going forward, Darvesh, I don't know. It would be subject to negotiations always with UP, but I understand UP is always in the market for revenue sources from government.
I see. And so maybe for listeners who are unaware, is the exchange basically that because UP owns the tracks, if Amtrak were to operate, let's say, I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical number, but let's say 6 trains a day, then basically Amtrak would have to pay UP for the kind of right to use those tracks for that amount of time that their trains are running. And that would be sort of part of the operating cost of running that line.
They already do. I'm sure that the Capital Corridor already does, as well as other users and other track owners across the nation. Maybe to be more particular, the plan right now would only be one round trip train a day emanating from the Bay Area and then turning around in Reno, if you will. So that there would only be one train going east and the same train returning on a westerly basis.
Gotcha. Okay, I see. And I guess what is UP's incentive to bid up the price, right? I mean, on some level, I would think that if they're not running enough trains on the trackage, they would see any sort of passenger service as like, hey, we're getting money for the same tracks that we own, and it's probably not going to cause that much more wear and tear relative to our sort of freight that's moving along the same corridor. So is there, I don't know, I guess I don't see why they would be reluctant about this, or is it just kind of classic, companies trying to make sure they maximize shareholder value and, get every last cent of their track rates?
Good question, Darvesh. I would think, like any good customer, we should be willing to pay our way. The railroad has been there a lot longer than us. They have a lot more experience and experts than us. Safety-wise, I think they've done a pretty good job, and we would certainly have to partner with them and rely on them in getting passengers, as we have in the past, such as the snow train, back and forth. I would think that, as always, there can be some negotiations between this at the state and federal level with UP, and it would be, of course, up to them based on their scheduling and their loads to see what kind of timing or scheduling we could do. That's the whole thing that began the Capital Corridor. And when I rode the Capital Corridor in the early days, let me tell you, we waited for a lot of freight trains. And that was just reality. You bring an extra book or magazine along because doggone it, the freights, that's their business. And we waited. And some of us were late getting to work, even downtown Sacramento. So it happens, and it might likely be a reality. But I think we've got to respect the law going all the way back to Abraham Lincoln and work in what I call a PPP, private-public partnership, and get this job done.
That's awesome. I mean, I think we spoke a bit before we started recording, but could you maybe like lay out for the audience how you envision people using this train? I know you spoke about your experiences commuting to Santa Clara, but what would the journey for a typical commuter sort of look like, or what kind of use would they get out of it?
Well,
In your
great question. Great question. I think that draws a good comparison. So we could do with and without a train. Okay, let's take your family of three coming out of the Bay Area somewhere, or even locally here, Roseville or Rockland, and heading to the slopes. They want to go to the Palisades resorts or one of the other ski resorts, Boreal, and they want to have either spend a family day or a family weekend. So everybody piles on the train, skis and everything, luggage, and they get up to a truckie station, and hopefully they get off there, and then they're met by their hotel or their friends or a hired transportation service that, by the way, most major ski resorts in the world have. So this is nothing new. We're not creating anything new here. Christopher Columbus has already been here and gone. We could talk about a train that would arrive safely. And as you perhaps, I hope I'm answering your question, I envision families and their loved ones, single individuals, everybody getting on a train safely, getting off. And then the wonderful transportation service, a Tahoe area rapid transit is already in place. Additional growth by that public transportation service is planned. And then there could be private providers, particularly for skiers that might need a little extra room. So I think this is very, very doable.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I can totally envision that. And as someone, like for context, I live in New York City, and I feel like I've very much come to appreciate just rail transit. Not only the subway system, but just the kind of commuter rail system, regional rail between cities in the Northeast. And I think a lot of people would benefit from that. And I see, to your point, like I think it could be a huge incentive for the ski resorts and other activities in the area. Because if they're, let's say, during peak season, kind of bottlenecked by the number of parking spaces, and if all of those are filled, and if they can get more customers, in the kind of same amount of time or in the same season, I imagine that would be just hugely beneficial to their bottom line. And if all they have to do is run a shuttle, every like 30 minutes from these various places, then I could see that being a huge upside. So do you get the sense that the kind of economic benefits are apparent to everyone at these stops, like Reno or Truckee and things like that, or do you get the sense that there's some hesitancy, like maybe just any sort of like pushback?
Well, I think one of the prime means or uses of government is to provide, particularly when it comes with innovation, is to provide the initial resources. We don't want to pay for it all. Not every taxpayer is going to agree with this. But I think if the government, the federal and state and the local governments, particularly Placer County with the rapid transit system, that public transit system they already have, can continue to provide what you call the initial funding, the pilot funding, the rest of the money will follow. You've got two major resorts going in. You've got the old Cal Neva. There's a good 500 rooms. And then you've got at least 1,400 rooms going in at Palisades. There's possibly 2,000 rooms and additional small resorts. And I don't think the local roads can handle that. People don't like traffic. So the question becomes, how can we, as generally bright people, educated people and experienced people come up with something that makes the public happy? Because I think the ultimate role of government isn't to pay for everything, but is to work with the private sector, developers and train operators, to make things pleasant for people so that we're not all stressed out.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds great. I guess, could I guess maybe play devil's advocate, and then you can, perhaps maybe
Sure.
counter
Sure.
So I guess one argument you can make is, well, if the frequency is only one train per day, and typically these trains have to make multiple stops, it's possible that my travel time to my destination is actually slower than my driving. And I want to make the most out of my stay in the Truckee or Reno area. And so, like I would love to go on a train, but just I'm trying to get in and out within the day maybe, or within a couple of days. And I think it would be more prudent to maximize my time, on the slopes as opposed to sitting on the train. Like, what would you say to someone who's perhaps worried about time or frequency in that regard?
Well, we also provide that we being the transit industry and transportation and government, we also recognize and allow buses as well as the Amtrak Zephyr, which is regularly scheduled. So those are two other alternatives. And then, of course, for those who might have resources to spend, they could always take private transportation. But the public transportation in the bus system, both operated by Amtrak and I believe it was Greyhound, it may have merged on that, as well as the Zephyr, which is regularly scheduled and runs daily, could help a person get back and forth in the event their schedule required it.
Gotcha. I see. I mean, that makes total sense. So I guess if I could summarize your argument, you're saying that this doesn't take away from other modes of transport. It simply augments it and gives people more flexibility in terms of how they get there. So if the weather permits, then a private transportation or a bus might be fine. But
one of my first jobs was the Joint Committee on Job Development, Senator Bill Green, Los Angeles, first Black senator. Let me tell you, Bill was very clear. Let's create jobs. So you provide a direct, clean, comfortable, safe means of transportation, and you create tourism all the way up and down that line. I think that's a home run.
That's awesome. I guess maybe one other sort of devil's advocate point is that, I think rail projects in California are sort of notoriously kind of over budget and behind schedule. I'm thinking, I mean, not only, I guess California high-speed rail is the most sort of prominent example, but I'm thinking of the Caltrain electrification took a very long time. I mean, like LA Metro has several projects that are stalled. I mean, Metrolink sort of fails to I shouldn't say fail, but they are reticent to electrify their alignments. So people might be asking like, hey, it doesn't seem like we have this great track record with rail. Even if, let's say I'm on board, like I want this no train, I want the service to Reno, but like the facts speak for themselves. We just don't have a great track record. What would your counter argument to that be?
It takes time and experience. Quite frankly, if I had my way, I would have hire some of the Japanese and Spanish and British and French rail executives to come over and show us the way. Particularly the Japanese and the Chinese now. They've hit it really well. I think we could learn from these other countries. People tell me, oh my gosh, it's the Sierras and you've got, rock and you've got, a heavy rail already going over there. And what are you going to do? Well, my answer is, they built that thing. They cut through the Sierras, Chinese and Irish and Portuguese laborers in 7 months. And they didn't have the hydraulic equipment. So my point here is when there is a will, there's a way. We can find expertise. One thing that's great about, the rail industry is it's always found a way through. And, there's a lot of history here, and I'd like to be part of our future history so that everybody, including your generation, can enjoy a way to travel, because I'm afraid the highways are wearing us out and spending a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think people fail to look at rail projects in context of sort of what the equivalent amount of road spending would be. I think if people saw the line items for how much an on-ramp costs and things like that, they'd be like, oh man, okay, this rail project is a steal. I mean, like
Hey,
$100 billion to make an on-ramp versus
let's
like
get
maybe
cultural. Let's get cultural. Kaizen. Does everybody know what that is? It's
Asian.
continuous improvement. And there's a guy named Edwards Deming that was sent over by General MacArthur to post-war Japan to rebuild their economy. And you know what they did? They built one of the best automobile industries in the world. So I think it's time that we could get Kaizen here, which means continuous improvement every day, every way. And I really think that, we can overcome the short-term obstacles, Darvish and you gentlemen. I really think we can, but we have to be willing to learn from others who've already done it.
Interesting.
Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Darvish. I didn't mean to interrupt. I did have a kind of a follow-up while we were touching on the topic of funding. I mean the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was, this is like that infrastructure bill that we think of at the federal level, what came out, a couple of years ago, 2, 3 years ago at this point. I was curious, if there had been any impact from that bill specifically on, a state level, line, or I guess in an interstate level line, like a rail line like this.
That's a good question. I don't have the exact answer, but I do know that Congress did appropriate with the partnership of the Federal Rail Administration. I want to say $100 million in round figures, but that was for the entire Western rail system. And I believe, I'm not certain, we could find out from our wonderful friends at Capital Corridor, there is roughly $10 million available from those funds to use on rail improvements in California.
Okay, that's a significant amount of money.
It's a start. It's a start.
It's a start. Yeah, correct.
I went up the street. I happened to have a neighbor who works for a major contractor, and I said, "Hey, it looks like that they've got $10 million to do some road work." And his response to me, "That's nothing for roads, streets." So maybe how do we bounce that money into a rail project and compare it side to side? You get this many miles of highway versus you get this many miles of rolling passenger stock and this many hundreds or thousands of passengers versus, the concrete and et cetera. It'd be an interesting economic comparison.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of had a separate follow-up. I worked for Caltrans for a little bit and particularly worked on some of the public engagement process associated with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
Yes.
And during that process, there were lots of different, subcommittees within the group that would talk about specifically where the funding would go from that act. And to the extent that there have been a lot of conversations around this project, what has the public perception been and the public engagement piece look like?
Well, that's a good question, and I wish I had the answer to that. I know the County of Placer did a survey, an online survey, about possibly 5 years ago, where they asked that question. If there was another train to Tahoe, would you use it? And there were other parts of that question regarding rail at the time, but I know that another train, a new train, was involved because, of course, the County of Placer surrounds a great deal, most of Lake Tahoe. Does that answer your question, or do we need to go into a further, budget money?
I think that answered it. I do understand that the 10 million set aside is definitely not enough to get a project like this off the ground, but is useful for the conceptual phase. I do have another question though before I hand it back off to Darvesh and Maclean.
Sure.
Specifically regarding the environmental impact of a project like this, what do you see being some of the long-term benefits for increasing funding for passenger rail as an alternative to increasing highway traffic, for example?
Okay, great question. When the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and its sister agency in Nevada were created to protect Lake Tahoe, They used several measures. I happen to work with IPES, which has to do with environmental water runoff, and both on the surface and underground. And one of the state of California's efforts at that time, through its Parks Department and other agencies, was to purchase vacant land around the lake to slow the degradation of the soil, the erosion process. Now, that's one part to particulate, but another part, and this is quite amazing, but I've come to understand that automobiles produce a lot of particulate, particularly in the air. And since clarity is one of the critical goals of Lake Tahoe, of saving Lake Tahoe, if you will, ecologically, the fewer cars we have in and around that basin, then the better we're going to do to protect the clarity of that lake, the fish that swim in it, the people that swim in it, the boats that float on it. All that particulate matter backs up in sewers, in our lungs, on our skin. So I think in a broad brush way, again, we're back to comparing, automobiles to publicly funded and privately collaborated transportation. And I would think a train beats the wheels off a car any day.
Yeah, and specifically actually kind of bouncing right off of that topic, kind of again relating to my experience in manufacturing. I know Siemens produces a locomotive, the Charger locomotive, which is a tier four. I'm forgetting the exact terminology, tier four, but it reduces particulate matters by 95%, I think,
Wow.
compared to tier three.
My DOUs.
Which I think you might be right.
Yeah, the diesel multiple units. Yeah.
Yeah, which it's surprisingly friendly for the environment, especially when compared to cars. It's a significantly healthier option for for travel, an impact on carbon footprint in particular.
Well, I know that's critical, and that's a great contribution, Maclean. Thank you. I sometimes scratch my head. I just got back from an energy meeting. I'm involved with local Pioneer Energy as a community activist, and I sometimes wonder about electricity. I know it was tough in the Bay Area. Could we do some kind of a modular energy plan for this train? Probably not practical. I mean, there's no such thing as a hybrid locomotive that I know of. But it begs the question, could we electrify part of this route? That could be. But I happened to see that wonderful train that the Canadians call Via go by my backyard. I'm about 400 feet from the track. Great big orange thing. I know it came from the Siemens factory. And being born in Canada and seeing that big maple leaf on there wanted me to go get in a good tussle with a hockey player.
Via trains are wonderful. Yeah.
Oh,
incredible.
gosh. But there again, and let me get towards this. We're talking about another nation adjacent to us, but it leads me into the question of privatization of rail. Look at what Brightline has done in Florida. 2 projects. I spoke to Gene Skoropowski, who used to be the general manager, perhaps the original general manager of the Capital Corridor Joint Project Authority. And gosh, he went down to Florida. Now, again, privatization raises a lot of questions and fears. But on the other hand, I have to admit, I don't know if you gentlemen would agree with me, that they've done one heck of a job in Florida getting 2 rail systems in within 5 years. And here we go now, Burbank to Las Vegas, $10 billion allocated in about 2 years from Congress and signed by President Biden. And they have a schedule to complete that Las Vegas train in 4 years. Now, here I stand waiting 12 years to see if we can get the long talked about train up to Tahoe. It brings a question, just putting on the taxpayer's hat now. Can the public system efficiently and effectively deliver a train? I think that deserves some consideration.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I guess I suspect that part of the reason Brightline has had so much success is they just really focus on those uh, just good city pairs, like they're too long to drive, too short to fly, um, and I guess the advantage they have with the Rancho Cucamonga to Las Vegas is that it's all just well, I mean, it's in the I-15 median, so the right of way I think is much easier to negotiate. You don't have to negotiate with like a lot of private landowners, as far as I understand. You just have to negotiate with Caltrans and the state of California and the state of Nevada. Um, but I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, I think there are actually hybrid locomotives. I'm not sure all the different combinations that exist. Like I know at least in the Northeast, there's trains that run on third rail and then diesel because not all the tracks are electrified. Or I mean, there's also like insane stuff like different types of like top third rail versus bottom third rail, which is like insane. But that's a separate point. I guess that kind of leads me into this question where do you think that it's perhaps worth it to have projects like these synergize with other maybe infrastructure projects that need to be done? Like, so, for example, one could make the argument that let's say you need to build extra power lines and distribution lines between the Sacramento Valley and the Sierra Nevadas, and maybe tacking on rail electrification could be one way to kind of justify that spend. Is to say like, okay, if we built all these substations on their own, this would be quite expensive. But we're already, we're already trenching stuff, we're already building all this infrastructure, and if we could just kind of get it done along the way, then this wouldn't be seen as such a kind of step outside of that lane. It would just be seen as getting kind of more, more bang for your buck, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, we might see necessary bridging and adjustment to the tracks involving infrastructure. There could assist local governments up and down the track. That's a great plan. And as far as I'm concerned, government ought to, collaborate on a regional basis so that all the communities get to if you will, join in the riches and the benefits of a project like this. Think of it more broadly. Other countries. Question is does it have to be solely passenger rail? Could they put a couple of freight cars onto a train like this? I mean, it's pushing the margins of safety and whatnot, but think of it this way: you're shipping 1,000 people up to the Tahoe Basin, and the guy up there that's making pizza needs cheese and dough. Well, why don't you just load a couple of cars with cheese and dough and have your pizza and your ski time too?
Yeah, that's funny because I guess it all comes full circle because that was that was kind of the original purpose of a lot of those rail corridors was just to move goods and people and on the same right of way. So yeah, who knows? Maybe we could just get back to the kind of original impetus for making
From what I remember, and I maybe our audience could fact check me on this, but the power output on I know like specifically like the Siemens train sets, but most modern train sets is actually like far exceeds the actual like length of the consist or the weight of the consist, even like fully loaded. So you can in theory actually attach other cars. You would need to just probably the different companies would need to negotiate with each other on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
at
go
the very
ahead.
least, I imagine it could be useful for even just moving like empty shipping containers or something like that, where it's literally just a matter of it's like, well, this is this empty thing we can't, it's like too expensive to truck it over the Sierra, so why not just kind of tack it on and maybe subsidize the fare price of the passenger trips through that.
What's wrong with taking a load of cars up to Reno?
No, that's a good point. Yeah, fair enough.
Right?
I mean, it seems contradictory to what we're doing, but on the other hand, if you've got a car dealership up there and you've got a railroad and somebody's engine locomotive pulling it up, there could be extra revenue again put back into the public system, and then we get all the wonderful, comfortable seats we need in the train.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that something positive here. We've already seen a footprint for if you mentioned the Las Vegas train. I was thinking of Burbank. You mentioned another town, which is probably more accurate. But now that we have a state relationship between Nevada and California, we can take that relationship, that those working people, the trust that organizations develop. Maybe we can put it to work up here, because Nevada and California still share a border up here. And it would be wonderful if the team that put that Las Vegas train together by state could work with us up here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that really speaks to your point of the momentum and kind of using one project to learn for subsequent projects, and not just having this kind of stop and start mentality, but really using learnings from one area to
And
apply to
here's
another.
another point. I know you guys are supposed to be asking me questions, but look, I was an immigrant from Canada once. I know what it felt like. My family was looked down on. We grew up but they called us aliens. I get it. I understand Americans are pretty tight about people coming into the country. Now, we have all the people that have come from all parts of the world to service the hospitality industry. But you know what? They can't live in the Tahoe Basin given the costs. I know that employee housing is coming along. So this kind of a train running between Reno and Sacramento areas could help employees too, workers, get back and forth from the resorts, the hospitality industry. It would serve kind of if you will, I'm searching for the word, if you will, worker justice function, so that people who have to work and like their jobs and can serve the tourism industry have a fair shot at transportation.
Yeah, no, yeah, I totally agree. Maybe not quite related to that, but I'm wondering, in your kind of ideal vision, let's say every kind of wish list item that you want comes true. What kind of impact would this service have, looking, let's say 30, 40 years down the line? What's your kind of like grand vision for what this could become?
Well, best thing in the world is take a look at some of those photos of the great ski resorts in France, in Italy, in Spain. Look at the development that goes, not just the new development, but some of the things they managed to preserve along the way. People can get up into Carson City and Reno and see the history and enjoy a meal in the restaurants, stay in the resorts. Those who prefer to gamble or see shows in Reno and also Lake Tahoe, they're right there. We've got public transit to serve them. I envision people being very cozy, kicking their feet up to a fire and enjoying the time, knowing that it didn't cost $6 a gallon, or they have to charge the car and there's a big line to charge the electric vehicle, or there's a terrible snowstorm and the cars can't get through on 80. There's a jackknife truck. I envision these people 30 to 40 sitting back with their children and their grandchildren and saying, gosh, these planners, these idealists in passenger rail really made our life comfortable and safe, and perhaps spread the equality that the workers also have a safe way to get back and forth.
Yeah, I definitely personally resonate with that point. I personally, I'm a huge fan of passenger rail. So a lot of this is, really speaking to me. And it made me curious and wonder if there has been any sort of like economic impact study on like how something like this would affect, not just like Tahoe, but also the cities of, Reno, like you mentioned, and like Sacramento area. I was curious if anything like that already exists today, any kind of studies.
Well, indirectly, the county, such as the county of Placer, has already done growth and development studies. Being a former planning commissioner, I know all these pieces fit together: transportation, air, and other mitigation efforts they have to make. But I think the long-term economic impact would be the short-term construction and jobs. In the midterm, additional trained personnel and jobs, perhaps enlarging the facility there in Truckee and Reno to handle another train. And then thirdly, the long-term impact would be one of the greatest resources we need is roofs over our head, not just for tourism, but also for the workers and the residents who need more housing in the Tahoe Basin and surrounding areas. So I think that the what we call the multiplier effect in transportation, going back to my planning commission days and the Department of Real Estate, working with the Building Industry Association, I want to say there's a 10-to-1 ratio. For every dollar spent on residential construction, it creates that many jobs.
Interesting. I guess related to that, do you think do you think these kinds of projects could benefit from models like the Hong Kong metro system, where they're sort of unique in that the transit agency owns a lot of the land around the station, and there's sort of this mutually beneficial, I guess, like synergy for the operations of the transit system to be adequate to drive business to the people leasing that land, and then that revenue kind of funds a lot of the capital improvement projects. Do you think that sort of thing could be useful where, let's say, I don't know, that I mean, I honestly don't even know how this would work, but like Amtrak purchases a parcel of land near the station that incentivizes them to develop it more. They gain some revenue from either leasing or just outright selling that land or the development, and that in turn funds future projects. Just curious your thoughts on that.
I think there already, great question. I think there already, Darvish, there already is a law that was passed roughly 5 years ago that gave developers incentives, required incentives from local government to developers in or within a mile of a transit station. I'm just talking in rough terms there, and I'm sure we could see once this train and the other pre-existing trains begin to work together in tandem, if you will, maybe with a few buses, you could find that financial incentive to develop retail and mixed use in and around those train stations. I believe that's very doable.
Yeah, and then I think you spoke to this a bit earlier, but how do you envision addressing the last mile problem? You kind of mentioned this, with like the Tahoe Regional uh, Transport Agency, or I apologize if
Yeah.
I'm getting the acronym wrong, but yeah, that seems like a key part of it. Or I could see someone, having that question, before riding the train of like, hey, like I'm going there, but like I'm in the city center, but like I want to get to this resort. Like how do I actually get there other than Ubering?
Well, I'll do both sides of that. Let's go
Sure.
historically, and then we'll go current day and future. Back in the day, I'm sure when the railroads began to run, passengers run, I'm sure the horses were waiting, and they had the wagons there, and you'd step out. A bit of a smile, a bit of a comedy, but going fast forward, we are dealing with a whole new age, I think, of transit system, particularly with carbon neutral and green transportation, electric buses, and others that I'm sure will come along, hydrogen powered, so that we can take people that last mile. That should be part of the not only the CEQA planning for the stations involved, but also the CEQA planning for and the term eludes me right now, but the federal environmental requirement that would a train like this would require. And so I think that the transportation, that last mile, could be very convenient. For example, going from Truckee to the resorts, it'd be that last 5 or 6 miles, but it's a heck of a lot better than the miles and miles of traffic that they currently experience, or the several or more $1 million they're going to have to put in parking as well as asphalt to get more cars into those resorts, which creates more particulate matter, which, the rivers don't run uphill. It's going to end up in the lake at some point.
Yeah, interesting. I guess, sorry, I had a question, but I totally forgot. If anyone else has a question.
I have one that might be something of a wrap-up question. But we've talked a lot about the different aspects of this project, some of the benefits, some of the drawbacks. With where the project is at now, where would you say that the next step has to come from in order for it to move forward?
Well, I'm always with the planners because they are the ones that nail down the details that a lot of us overlook. A great deal of respect. On the other hand, I've always seen elected officials, Senator Tim Leslie. I'm sure there's the legislators in the Sacramento area that I've forgotten, and also legislators. I believe Congressman Garamendi had some activity in supporting. So to answer your question, I think elected officials could use this as a means of showing their leadership in getting federal and state money to fund this. I think that's where we need to go.
Is there any aspects of this project that we didn't touch on throughout the course of the interview that you want to take the time now to just highlight for our audience?
What really drew this to my attention is some of the pending projects up in the Tahoe Basin. I know there's a lot of people that work their hearts out to make that development positive and to benefit the people of the counties along the way. But also I have to think that the rail system may have been overlooked because there's a great deal of concern and doubt whether or not rail can happen and happen in a truly efficient way, similar to Europe, where those trains run on time and they run exactly as they should. And I think that we have a challenge here, all of us, in the interest of public transportation and private partnerships. I think that we need to work hard on this, but once it's in place, we can, again, kick back at a fireplace somewhere up in the Tahoe area and enjoy things and know that we didn't have to produce a lot of hydrocarbons, as my old chemistry professor used to warn me about.
Well, thank you, Geoff. We appreciate your time and your expertise, and we hope that we can have you on again sometime in the future.
Thank you very much, guys.